Cornelius Vanderbilt stood on the deck of the ship, the strong wind sweeping through his early gray hair, his eyes following the long lines of trains stretching along the Hudson River. The water reflected the evening light, shimmering like numbers dancing in his mind. Every ferry, every rail car was part of a bigger dream, far beyond Staten Island where he was born. He felt every pulse of the transportation industry, every opportunity and risk lurking nearby. Every decision made today would shape not only his own fate, but the very face of America for decades to come. Below the deck, workers busied themselves with their tasks, their eyes following him as if witnessing power and authority. But in Vanderbilt's gaze, there was more than that. There was ambition, fear, and the loneliness of a man who knew that on the path to conquest, no one could fully accompany him. Who would emerge victorious in this race for power? Who would control the flow of American transportation? And Cornelius Vanderbilt, could he turn this colossal dream into reality? Just one decision, one move, and the world would never be the same again. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born into a poor family on Staten Island, where each passing day was measured in sweat and toil. Their small house nestled among worn dirt roads, where the sound of the Hudson River waves mingled with the clatter of horse hooves and the knocks of passing boats. His father, a stern but serious man, taught him that money was the measure of success, that in this life, no one would give him anything unless he took it for himself. From an early age, Cornelius learned to observe, listen, and calculate. He watched the boats on the river, the strokes of each oar, the turning of each paddle wheel, and in his eyes flickered ambition unseen in a boy just learning to walk. Every reminder from his father, every tender or worried gesture from his mother, etched itself deeply into Vanderbilt's mind, shaping a decisive character, a person who always knew what he wanted and was ready to fight for it. Poverty did not crush Cornelius. On the contrary, it forged in him an iron will. He learned hard work from small tasks, from rowing cargo along the Hudson to observing merchants on their trading journeys. To the young boy, the world appeared both vast and harsh, and to survive, he had to seize control of every opportunity himself. Family life was a complex picture. A strict father set high expectations, sometimes delivering harsh reprimands. A gentle but worried mother tried to shield her son from life's trials. Cornelius learned to balance sternness with love, yet within him remained a void, a feeling that only he could shape his own destiny. The world around him was also a demanding teacher. Dirty streets, bustling ports, the clang of ships' bells, and the smell of smoke from old ferries all left deep impressions on Vanderbilt's mind. He began to notice gaps in the transportation market, opportunities others overlooked, too consumed by their daily lives. Even as a child, he knew no miracle would change his fate except his own hands and mind. These early lessons became more than life experience. They were the first bricks building a colossal ambition. Vanderbilt observed, learned, and remembered every strategy and mistake of others. Each small failure he witnessed served as a warning, a lesson etched into his mind. He understood that power never came easily, that to dominate an industry, one had to accept sacrifice and fight relentlessly. On quiet evenings, when the sunset painted the Hudson red, Cornelius stood at the docks, watching ships arrive and depart. His heart brimmed with ideas and dreams. Every ferry, every merchant vessel, represented a potential step along a path he knew would lead to unparalleled wealth and power. Yet within that gaze also lay solitude, the feeling of a man aware that on the road to conquest, no one could walk the entire journey with him. This was the era that shaped Cornelius Vanderbilt, the poor boy with a keen mind, an unbounded drive to rise, and a steadfast will, destined to become a symbol of power and far-reaching influence in America's transportation industry. His early experiences, family, poverty, love, and discipline wove the foundation for one of the most powerful figures America would ever witness. As Cornelius Vanderbilt stepped out of the shadow of his childhood, he knew the path ahead left no room for hesitation. On the Hudson River, where ferries and merchant ships stretched like lifelines of commerce, Vanderbilt began to leave his first mark. No longer the curious boy, he was now a young man with calloused hands, a determined gaze, and a mind that never ceased to work. In the early days, he took jobs rowing boats and transporting goods for local shipowners. The work was grueling, physically demanding, toughening his hands and muscles. Yet in Vanderbilt's mind, it was merely preparation for grander plans. On each journey along the narrow, winding river, he observed captains and merchants, learning to calculate time, measure cargo, and predict prices. These seemingly ordinary skills would become the foundational bricks for the transportation empire he would one day build. Those days also taught Vanderbilt about fierce competition. He realized that every ferry, every train could be either a rival or an opportunity. When a local merchant deliberately raised prices or delayed a shipment, Vanderbilt never lost his temper. Instead, he watched, memorized, and planned strategic retaliation. To outsiders, it seemed caution, but to Vanderbilt, it was how he learned to survive and triumph on this unforgiving river. His first venture as an entrepreneur came when he invested his own money to lease a small ferry, transporting goods and passengers between docks. In that moment, his eyes lit up as if he saw a wide-open door before him. It was not merely about money, but about power and control. Owning that first ferry marked the beginning of a larger dream, a dream to dominate all waterways and major transportation routes across America. Things were not always smooth. Vanderbilt faced storms, treacherous currents, and technical failures aboard the ships. There were nights when he sat alone on the ferry deck, staring at the black sky, listening to waves crash against the hull, realizing that power was never an easy gift. Yet these challenges, these moments of danger and solitude on the river, honed him into someone calmer, more calculating, and more decisive than anyone else. Alongside this, Vanderbilt learned the strength of relationships. He began cultivating ties with merchants, captains, and workers, understanding that power did not come solely from money, but from the ability to connect and control information. Small meals, conversations on the docks, handshakes, promises, all became invisible threads weaving the first network of influence he would command. Gradually, these small steps began to yield results. Vanderbilt increased the number of ferries, expanded routes, attracted more customers, and built a reputation. Yet in his eyes always flickered a spark of dissatisfaction. He knew that ferries and minor routes alone could not make him the master of transportation. What Vanderbilt envisioned was a larger empire, one where he would control every river, every ferry, every merchant vessel stretching across the nation. Each ship's arrival, each successful delivery, sent a pulse of power through him. It was not just a business victory, but a triumph of will, intellect, and persistence. Even when his operations were still modest, his gaze was always fixed on the future, seeing a grand picture only he could imagine, a transportation network spanning America, operating under his command, granting power beyond imagination. Those first steps on the Hudson were lessons not just in business, but in life. Vanderbilt learned responsibility, how to stand firm amidst storms, and how to turn small failures into valuable experience. In these seemingly ordinary moments, the foundation of one of the most formidable transportation empires in American history was laid, and the poor Staten Island boy was taking his first strides toward becoming a symbol of power and ambition. Cornelius Vanderbilt was no longer the quiet young man on the ferry deck. He had entered the phase of expansion, where ambition no longer settled for small ferries, but aimed at a mighty maritime transportation empire. Along the eastern seaboard of the United States, from New York to New Orleans, from the port of Boston to the southern harbors. Vanderbilt began acquiring, merging, and expanding his fleet. Each ship was not merely a means of transport, but a crucial link in the network of power he was gradually constructing. Vanderbilt's strategy was both calculated and ruthless. He observed his rivals, measured the strength of every fleet and ferry owner, and made decisions many considered harsh. Some he bought out, others he undercut to drive competitors into bankruptcy, and on numerous occasions, these rivalries turned into direct confrontations between tough men on the Hudson and major eastern rivers. Small failures of his opponents were invaluable lessons for Vanderbilt. Victories brought power, wealth, and prestige, which he knew would serve as stepping stones for further advancement. But power did not come from economic strength alone. Vanderbilt understood that the trust of customers, workers, and captains was also a form of power. He carefully observed every reaction, every smile, every complaint and compliment, memorizing details to perfect a transportation network no one could dismantle. Every contract, every timely voyage, every warehouse delivered on schedule increased Vanderbilt's credibility and authority in the eyes of all. There were nights when he sat alone on the deck, the moonlight reflecting off the water, sparkling like numbers in his mind. He thought of hundreds of ships, thousands of workers, and countless decisions to make. Vanderbilt's power lay not just in money, but in his ability to control, anticipate, and exploit every opportunity. Each time a rival failed, a flicker of satisfaction crossed his eyes, but it was also a reminder that power must always be reinforced, that no one could afford to rest on past victories. In the fiercest moments of competition, Vanderbilt displayed ruthlessness yet intelligence. He undercut prices, negotiated, sometimes took risks by sending ships on new routes uncharted by anyone else, all with one goal: to dominate American maritime transportation. These decisions affected not only him but hundreds of families, workers, merchants, and the local economy. It was here that one could truly sense the weight of power. Every move Vanderbilt made carried far-reaching consequences, both positive and negative. His surroundings became alive and challenging. Waves crashed against the hull. Strong winds swept his face. The ship's whistle echoed loudly, and the afternoon sun glinted on fluttering flags. All were part of the theater of power that Vanderbilt had scripted. Every small detail, from tying ropes to steering the wheel, reflected his precision, intelligence, and authority. Yet amidst all that power and success, Vanderbilt remained a man with a human side. He knew that the greater the power, the heavier the pressure. Few saw the long nights he spent awake on deck, calculating strategy, or the lonely moments spent contemplating the future. The greatest power, he understood, was not in ships or fleets, but in the ability to make decisions that no one could block. Step by step, Vanderbilt turned ambition into reality. His maritime empire was more than ships. It was a symbol of power that commanded respect in the industry. People spoke of him with reverence, sometimes fear, and all acknowledged that Cornelius Vanderbilt was forever changing the face of American transportation. His strategies, economic battles, and ruthless decisions were a testament to the intelligence, ambition, and courage of a man who had learned from childhood how to survive in a harsh world. Vanderbilt was no longer merely a businessman. He had become an icon of power, ambition, and unprecedented change in American history. Every ship, every port, every route he touched bore the mark of a man ready to conquer all. After consolidating his power on the rivers, Cornelius Vanderbilt realized that the true future no longer lay in small ships and ferries. His vision turned to a larger, more challenging field railroads. The rail lines sprouting across America were the lifeblood of commerce, development, and power. For Vanderbilt, this was the opportunity to transform his ambition from a maritime empire into a nationwide force. The first steps were far from easy. Vanderbilt faced seasoned entrepreneurs, tycoons who had long controlled crucial rail lines. Yet failures never deterred him. He meticulously studied every route, every rail car, every freight and passenger contract. Every detail was recorded, analyzed, and transformed into concrete action plans. For him, controlling the railroads was not just business. It was holding the arteries of America itself, determining the survival and power of the entire transportation industry. Vanderbilt began by acquiring small railroads, gradually merging and expanding them. These ventures required not only capital but also strategic calculation, the skill to undercut rivals, and the ability to navigate political barriers. At times, he had to negotiate directly with proud opponents, unwilling to yield an inch of track. Vanderbilt never faltered. His gaze was cold, his mind always ahead of every scenario, and his heart knew that only the strongest would endure. Railroad expansion granted Vanderbilt power beyond imagination. Every train running through major cities, every freight and passenger car, bore his imprint of authority. Transportation contracts not only increased his wealth, but also solidified his dominance over competitors. Vanderbilt was not merely rich, he shaped the flow of commerce, determining how goods, people, and information moved across the nation. While rivals struggled to compete, Vanderbilt leveraged intelligence, persistence, and foresight to gain advantage. He established more efficient routes, optimized travel times, and sometimes used pricing tactics to force competitors aside. Every move was meticulously planned, and each small success became another step toward conquering the entire transportation sector. Yet power came with responsibility and solitude. On long train journeys, across vast fields and endless forests, Vanderbilt contemplated his future and that of America. He knew that few could understand the magnitude of this power, and sometimes his decisions would hurt some people, but these were necessary to build an empire that no one could overturn. His eyes looked far ahead, toward the rail lines linking east to west, as if he sought to hold the whole of America in his hands. The years of building railroads also brought deep lessons in human relations. Vanderbilt learned to navigate politics, negotiate with investors, and manage thousands of workers. He understood that strength lay not only in money and locomotives, but also in the ability to lead, inspire, and control those around him. Every railcar, every route, every contract testified to his intelligence and authority. Step by step, Vanderbilt transformed a chaotic, fragmented railroad industry into an efficient, unified network under his control. His power extended beyond the rivers, spreading across the nation, from New York's ports to distant western cities. Americans began to see Vanderbilt not just as a wealthy businessman, but as a symbol of power, ambition, and visionary foresight. Trains roared along the tracks, whistles echoed through valleys and plains. Sunlight glimmered on iron fleets, all bearing the mark of a man who, from childhood, had learned to conquer the world. Vanderbilt did not merely build railroads. He built a part of American history, one that would forever be remembered for dominance, intellect, and limitless ambition. As Cornelius Vanderbilt built his transportation and railroad empire, he faced not only ships and tracks, but also invisible yet equally dangerous adversaries: law, politics, and public opinion. Great power comes with responsibility and societal scrutiny. Every move Vanderbilt made was examined, and every business strategy could spark controversy. His rivals were not just arrogant businessmen, but law-established railroad tycoons who had dominated key lines and were unwilling to yield power. Vanderbilt confronted them with a firm, sometimes ruthless strategy. He undercut prices, bought up lines, merged companies, and at times employed every means to weaken his opponents. Yet not everyone accepted this. Lawsuits began to emerge, from contract disputes and pricing battles to accusations of market manipulation. Vanderbilt faced the law, sometimes enduring long trials, formidable lawyers, and intense public pressure. Meanwhile, the press began to take notice. Stories of Vanderbilt's power and ambition were woven, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes skeptical. Some of the public saw him as a genius. Others viewed him with fear and disdain. Rumors about his ruthlessness spread, raising questions about business ethics. Yet the controversy made his name stand out more than ever. Vanderbilt knew that attention was power, and he learned to turn public scrutiny to his advantage, even if it meant enduring harsh criticism. For Vanderbilt, the greatest challenges were not just lawsuits or rivals, but the daily high-stakes decisions he had to make. At times, he had to decide whether to open a new rail line through undeveloped territory, where technical difficulties, financial crises, or investor opposition could arise. Each decision carried high risk, but also the chance to consolidate power. His gaze remained cold, yet with a trace of concern. He understood that power was never guaranteed, and collapse could come at any moment if he faltered. Tensions were not confined to the outside world. They penetrated his inner circle as well. Managers, employees, and captains sometimes questioned his decisions, or internal conflicts arose due to the aggressive strategies Vanderbilt employed. He understood that power was not only economic strength, but also the ability to manage people, maintain discipline, and inspire trust among those around him. Every meeting, every order, had to be carefully considered, for even a small mistake could shake the entire transportation network he had painstakingly built. At the same time, Vanderbilt's personal life bore a heavy toll. Pressure from public scrutiny, legal battles, and business competition left him little time for family. Conflicts with his wife and children, lonely moments in his private rooms, all weighed on the man who had risen from a poor boy to a transportation magnate. Vanderbilt learned to maintain his focus, sometimes sacrificing personal relationships to protect the empire he had built. Yet amidst all the controversies and challenges, Vanderbilt stood firm. He knew that power is never given. It must be seized with intelligence, decisiveness, and persistence. Each time he overcame a lawsuit or outmaneuvered a rival, he felt the pulse of true power, not in the number of ships or rail lines, but in the ability to make decisions, take responsibility, and stand resolute in the storm. Vanderbilt also learned an important lesson. Disputes, conflicts, and challenges are not always enemies. They are tests of intellect, strength, and perseverance. Only through trials can a person truly prove their leadership and power. And Cornelius Vanderbilt demonstrated this by turning turbulence into opportunity, criticism into motivation, and continuing to expand his empire with unstoppable momentum. Those years of challenge and controversy, from lawsuits and rivalries to public scrutiny, not only strengthened Vanderbilt, but also revealed the essence of the man, someone willing to face risk, take responsibility, and fight relentlessly to protect power and ambition. This was the stage on which he became one of the undeniable symbols of power, a figure whom all of America regarded with respect and sometimes fear. Amidst the power, controversies, and empire Cornelius Vanderbilt built, his personal life became complex and fraught with contradictions. In the public eye, he was the transportation magnate, a symbol of power and ambition. Within the four walls of his home, Vanderbilt was a man burdened with worries, loneliness, and heavy responsibility toward his family. Vanderbilt married Sophia Johnson, a gentle yet strong woman who stood behind him to maintain the household and raise their children. Sophia understood that life beside a powerful man would never be peaceful. Family meals were often brief, punctuated by discussions of ships, contracts, and business strategy. Yet in Sophia's eyes, there was always a quiet worry. She looked at her husband with love, but also with caution, aware that his power and passion for work consumed most of his time and attention. Their children grew up under the shadow of their father's immense authority. They learned to obey, to observe, and to understand that discipline was paramount both at home and in business. Yet they also felt the distance that power created. Vanderbilt spent little time at home, frequently away managing urgent matters on rivers and railroads. On the rare occasions he was with his children, he made every moment count teaching life lessons in business strategies. These brief moments left lasting impressions, shaping the next generation of the Vanderbilt empire. Conflicts arose as well. Some family members did not fully agree with his methods, feeling neglected or burdened by their father's pursuit of power. Vanderbilt had to learn balance between personal ambition, responsibility to his empire, and the love for his family. On many nights, he would sit alone in his study, oil lamp casting shadows over maps and railroad schematics, wondering, could he be both a good father and the conqueror of America's transportation industry? Yet in these tense moments, Cornelius revealed his true character. He was a man willing to take responsibility, never shirking difficulties, whether in business or at home. He learned to listen, to negotiate, not only with rivals, but with his wife and children. Every decision, at home or in the business world, was carefully considered, for he understood that lasting success required both power and love. Family life also brought rare moments of peace and happiness. Quiet afternoons on the porch, the laughter of children echoing into his study, or weekend family meals reminded Vanderbilt that power was not everything. These moments, though fleeting, rejuvenated him and strengthened his resolve to continue conquering railroads and expanding his vast fleet. Additionally, Vanderbilt taught his children the value of labor, perseverance, and intellect. He often took them down to the docks, showing them how to observe ships, calculate cargo, and anticipate market trends. These hands-on lessons, blending fatherly guidance with business strategy, helped his children mature while preserving the family legacy. Yet the pressures of power and responsibility were ever present. Vanderbilt faced a loneliness that few outside his family could truly understand. He looked out across the tracks, watching trains run, knowing that each step he took would shape not only the fate of America, but also the happiness of those he loved most. Through these experiences, Cornelius Vanderbilt emerged not just as a powerful magnate, but as a complex, emotional man capable of suffering, of worry, and of love. The conflicts, sacrifices, and efforts to sustain his family gave depth to his character, humanizing his power and making his story relatable and poignant. In the darkness of his study, amid maps, contracts, and railroad diagrams, Vanderbilt closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and reminded himself, the greatest power is not merely dominating rivers or railroads, but maintaining one's true self amidst the heights and trials life demands. It is here, in the delicate balance between authority and affection, that Vanderbilt comes alive, a figure both formidable and deeply human, an emblem of a turbulent era. Old age came to Cornelius Vanderbilt, not with the quiet grace that some transportation magnates might have known. As his hair turned silver and his shoulders bore the weight of decades spent building an empire, he had yet to step away from the battles he had begun in youth. Power, empire, and vast railroad networks remained under his control, but the challenges now took new forms: health, time, and emerging rivals vying for influence. Inspection trips along the rail lines, meetings with managers and employees, now left him more fatigued. Yet Vanderbilt maintained a pace seemingly undiminished. His eyes, once blazing with the fire of authority, now carried a hint of weariness, but remained sharp as ever. He knew that even a small misstep or delayed decision could shake the very empire he had painstakingly built. And indeed, young, ambitious rivals, fluent in new technologies, began challenging his long-held authority, forcing Vanderbilt to respond more swiftly and decisively than ever before. Technological changes also posed a formidable challenge. Steamships, modern iron rail cars, and new lines emerging demanded that Vanderbilt learn, adapt, and apply business strategies accordingly. Though accustomed to absolute power, he realized that the transportation world had changed, and successors would need mastery of new knowledge to sustain the empire. With clear-eyed pragmatism, he resolved to pass on his knowledge, experience, and rigor to his children, preparing them to carry forward the path he had forged. Vanderbilt's health, too, began to betray him. Pain and sleepless nights forced him to pause and reflect on the value of time and existence. Yet in these quiet moments, he retained his inner strength. He understood that old age did not mark the end of power, but a moment to reflect and guide the future, ensuring that what he had built endured even without his direct command. Amidst power and health challenges, Vanderbilt also faced personal losses. Some loved ones passed away, relationships shifted, and loneliness became more pronounced. Yet, in these solitary moments, his true self emerged, a man of intellect and ambition, yet human, capable of fear, nostalgia for youth, and a desire to see the next generation flourish. He spent time writing, teaching, and passing down invaluable experience to his children and key managers, ensuring the empire retained the identity he had shaped. Vanderbilt's final challenge was not merely power or business, but the ability to let go. He had to learn that all things have limits. Rail lines, ships, contracts, no matter how powerful, cannot last forever without succession. He faced this truth with equanimity, understanding that true power lies not merely in possession, but in ensuring that the empire survives the test of time and the challenges of the next generation. In his final days, Vanderbilt often stood on the deck of a ship, gazing out at the Hudson River or the sprawling rail lines, feeling a profound sense of pride. Not for the ships, the tracks, or the immense wealth, but because he had built an empire marked by intelligence, decisiveness, and ambition. Every battle, difficulty, and controversy became an inseparable part of the story of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the boy from poverty who had reached the pinnacle of American power. Old age also brought self-reflection. He looked back on choices, decisions, and even mistakes. Yet not once did he feel regret. For him, every challenge, every dispute, every effort had contributed to shaping a man and an empire the world could not ignore. True power, he knew, was not merely wealth or status, but the ability to stand firm, see far, and prepare for a future beyond oneself. Vanderbilt passed away with eyes still bright, though weary, looking toward the rail lines and ships he had built. He left America not just a transportation empire, but the image of a man who lived fully with power, ambition, and emotion, a figure both ruthless and human, forever etched in history. Cornelius Vanderbilt may have passed away, but the empire he built endured, standing as a testament to intelligence, decisiveness, and limitless ambition. His power was not confined to ships, railroads, or massive contracts. It left an indelible mark on American culture, shaping how commerce, transportation, and influence were exercised for decades to come. Vanderbilt's first legacy was the strength of his transportation network. The rail lines stretching across the United States, the fleets of merchant ships and ferries, not only connected cities and regions, but also transformed the way Americans traveled, traded, and communicated. Every train, every route he designed and controlled became the lifeblood of the economy, helping America become a dynamic and rapidly developing nation. Yet Vanderbilt's legacy was not merely material or financial. It resided in thought, in the approach to business and leadership. He demonstrated that ambition and intellect could overcome any obstacle, but that power also carried responsibility and wisdom. Future generations learned from him not just how to dominate the transportation industry, but how to balance authority, manage risk, and navigate challenges. This is why Vanderbilt's name became a symbol of perseverance, strategic thinking, and vision. American culture was deeply influenced by the way he built his empire. Vanderbilt embodied the spirit of self-reliance, perseverance, and risk-taking values that many Americans came to regard as exemplary. His story from a poor boy rowing on the Hudson River to a transportation and railroad tycoon became legendary, inspiring thousands to pursue success despite immense challenges. Vanderbilt proved that anyone, regardless of their origins, could achieve power with intellect, persistence, and determination. Moreover, his legacy extended to law and industry governance. The disputes, lawsuits, and challenges he faced established precedents, standards, and operational methods that made the transportation system more efficient, transparent, and sustainable. These innovations benefited not only Vanderbilt and his contemporaries, but also influenced the way America's transportation and commerce sectors functioned for generations. Vanderbilt's legacy was also deeply tied to family. Though none of his children could wield power quite like he did, they inherited his mindset, discipline, and lessons of survival. The Vanderbilt family became a symbol of wealth, influence, and authority, demonstrating how personal experience and intellect could be transformed into a long-lasting heritage beyond the individual. He is remembered as a figure of duality, ruthless in business, yet deeply human in his concern for people and the nation's development. This complexity makes his legacy compelling and relatable. It was never solely about raw power, but about a man whose ambition, intellect, mistakes, challenges, and compassion intertwined to leave an enduring mark on history. Today, the rail lines, ports, and transportation infrastructure still form part of America's modern structure, reminding current generations of Vanderbilt's vision and extraordinary efforts. His lessons in strategy, perseverance, and leadership continue to inspire leaders, entrepreneurs, and anyone striving to turn their dreams into reality. Perhaps Vanderbilt's greatest legacy is the lesson that power and ambition are inseparable from humanity. He showed that building an empire requires intelligence, persistence, resilience, and, simultaneously, the ability to preserve human values. It was this combination that made Cornelius Vanderbilt both formidable and complex, a lasting icon in American history. Looking at the trains moving along rivers, iron rails stretching across states, and the routes he established, one sees more than wealth and power. One sees a story of a man, of ambition, and of a legacy that transcends time alive and inspiring future generations. Vanderbilt did not merely change transportation. He changed the way Americans perceive power, effort, and success. Cornelius Vanderbilt journeyed from a poor boy on the Hudson River to a transportation tycoon, a symbol of power and ambition in America. The empire he built not only transformed the way goods and passengers moved, but also shaped culture, commerce, and leadership thinking for generations to come. Looking back at Vanderbilt's life, we see a complex man, ruthless and determined in business, yet deeply emotional and responsible toward his family and society. Every decision, every challenge, every controversy reflects both his power and humanity, making him an unforgettable figure in American history. Imagine applying Vanderbilt's intelligence, ambition, and perseverance to your own life today. You could learn to stand firm in the face of challenges, turn obstacles into opportunities, and build your own empire, whether it's a career, passion, or personal influence. If you love extraordinary historical stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next videos. Let's explore together the people, events, and lessons that shaped American history, where power, ambition, and humanity intertwine in stories full of emotion.